your friend doesn't stab anyone while you're out here sightseeing.
So nice of you.
Parsley, nice to meet you.
Sage.
Rosemary. I'm transgender.
You're at ease, Pores.
You're a jerk. Sure.
Does anyone here have any concept of what a guardian is?
Episode 4. Episode 2 is when we got to the academy, so of course episode 4 has our main characters going home. Because when you set your show in a magical Harry Potter school, you want to immediately break away from that setting. Due to a Trabber infestation, the girls all have to go home for the weekend while the school gets the magic equivalent of fumigated.
Good morning, everybody. Get out of here immediately.
Rosemary and Sage go back to Anise and Aloe's house. Time wants to go camp out in the woods rather than see her mother, but Parsley decides this is unacceptable and insists that Time come stay with her instead. Parsley takes Time to her family's smithy to stay with her indeterminable amount of younger brothers.
I think there are 14 now.
And her parents who... Okay, no. I am sorry, there's a lot of fluidity in fantasy I can handle. I like when fantasy settings don't just copy and paste the same tropes over and over, but I am sick and tired of this erasure of female dwarves having beards. Terry Pratchett and Tolkien himself did not establish the fact that dwarven women are bearded just for the entire entertainment industry to go, yeah, actually, we don't want to do that.
It's the beards.
You absolute cowards! Give your dwarven women beards! It's okay for Parsley to not have a beard because she's not an adult. Also, it's okay for Varric to not have a beard because his entire character is about his disdain for the suffocating traditionalism of dwarves that led to his borderline abusive father's obsession with dwarven honor that got him killed and sent his mother to drink in an earlier grave. He's allowed to shave. But Bianca, on the other hand, fucking cowards! Where was I? Oh right, Parsley goes home to her plethora of brothers, her parents, and...
It is a girl. Girl! Oi!
Meanwhile, Anise and Aloe ask Rosemary and Sage how life at the academy is going.
It's good. It's different than I expected.
Okay, so I literally just realized something while writing this, but Sage has never been happy so far. And you might be thinking, oh, but that's her character. She's supposed to be anxious and also struggling with the poorly defined magic system. And I fully understand that that is the intent, and her character is mostly written to match this, but it's more than just that. Sage is never happy, or excited, or enthusiastic, or even just content with anything. Maybe I'm noticing it because I used to know someone like this a long time ago, but it comes across not that Sage is struggling, but more that Sage actively tries not to enjoy herself. She was unhappy not to share every class she has with Rosemary. She was understandably stressed by the lack of orientation on her first day. She was stressed about not understanding the new methodology because it's different than what she's used to, and not being good at something right away made her feel like a failure, which... Okay, yeah, I'll give her that one. She was bothered by Amaryllis making fun of her old magic upbringing, and when asked how the academy training is going, she responds with, "It's going okay, I guess." At this point, I think her being a little unhappy can still be justified, but I'm gonna bring this up again in an upcoming episode, so just take note of this. Anyway, after sounding less than enthusiastic about her time at the academy so far, Anise and Aloe give Sage a gift to try and cheer her up. Rose doesn't get a gift, but Aloe bribes her by materializing food out of thin air without any equivalent exchange for doing so. I'm sorry, but the lack of world building in a show when it has its fantasy setting at the forefront is infuriating. Sage's gift turns out to be a terrasphere. These magical doohickeys which people, I guess, used to do magic with? They're briefly mentioned in the first episode when Sage is impressed by Anise's terrasphere and asks to hold it before saying that she thought that new magic and old magic were incompatible. So I think they're needed to do magic, I think. Look, they're wands, okay? They're Madoka Magica soul gems that work the same way wands do, except they only do new magic. That's as much as I can figure out. Sage is...
It's,
Do you like it?
she loves it, right, Sage?
Of course. Anise shows her how to activate it. Okay, Sage. Aloe says that Sage is too sweet to admit she dislikes it. What? Anise says they'll take it back, to which Sage pulls this face. But when Anise elaborates that they'll go with her to get a new one that fits her better, Sage is unhappy about this. You see what I mean? Let's check with Parsley and Thyme instead. The backgrounds in this episode are not braid PNG like the first episode was, but they still bother me. Mostly in Parsley's home. The perspective is very weird. I think it's supposed to be a fisheye, or maybe not. I think it just looks like a fisheye because we're supposed to be high up in like one of the arches. But the perspective on this countertop here feels like we're looking at it completely top down and don't match Parsley and her mom who are working on it. This continues on throughout these scenes where shelves in the background seem to bend at odd angles or make you feel like there's not enough space for a character to be standing where they're standing. Also, while I'm here, there's a strange issue I noticed in this episode specifically where the characters' eye lines are not properly drawn. So they often look like they're staring off into space and having war flashbacks. Here, I'll show you. You see, once again, just like the bad animation in the first 3 episodes, this is a storyboard problem, not an animation problem. The animation was outsourced to Korea, and Korean studios are incredibly particular and do exactly as they're told. If you give them badly drawn boards, that's how they will animate them. They're not paid to improvise. Anyway, back to the plot. Apparently Parsley's mom had an entire baby and didn't bother telling Parsley about it, let alone that the new baby is her first sister because we've needed all hands on deck lately. Then she goes back to peeling potatoes without elaborating. Okay. While Parsley's mom questions Thyme, we learn that Thyme is from somewhere called the Fairy Woods, which is a few weeks' journey away from Lingarth, which I kept calling Lindbergh in the first video because I'm terrible with names. Thyme says her father is still in the woods, but her mother is in Lingarth, before she contradicts herself and hurriedly says that her mom's out of town. Although Thyme so far has been very shut off, slightly antagonistic and reluctant to engage with other people, we get the impression that there's most likely some family trouble going on. This is further punctuated by Parsley's dad coming home. He greets Parsley before Thyme is introduced as Parsley's friend. Thyme tries to correct her that she's just her roommate, but Parsley's dad brushes this off and says any friend of Parsley's is part of the family. And when Thyme acts stiffly to his offer of a handshake, he pats her on the shoulder warmly before sitting down. Do you see what I've just described here? We take it completely for granted in shows that are written well from start to finish, but it's in shows like High Guardian Spice, where the writing so far has been extremely subpar or distracted by giving us stiff and awkward character reference sheets, that we can contrast when it does actually know how to give us good, subtle and informative character writing. From just these brief few scenes that only take maybe a minute of screen time, we know that Parsley is part of a large and close-knit family, but that there's some tension underneath. Thyme is shown in complete contrast when placed within this dynamic. She's not being mean or aggressive, but comes across as out of her element and unsure how to act, telling us that whatever family she's from, it's probably not as lively and affectionate. She's also very guarded, not even talking about her family at all. From just this scene alone, we learn so much about Parsley's upbringing and home life, but we learn just as much about Thyme's, and all this without any actual explanations or showcase that distracts us from the current plot. Parsley's dad is excited for Parsley to have met the new baby girl in the family, and goes on to say he can't wait to have all of his girls back under one roof.
You mean for the holidays, right?
Thyme makes the correct decision to get some firewood and excuses herself from the room.
It's just... we're wondering if you've got it out of your system yet.
Oh no. Surprisingly, Parsley does not blow up at her parents about this. She doesn't even seem that shocked. She merely excuses herself from the table, saying she needs to go sit on the roof to process this, and leaves. Anyway, Sage has to go shopping to pick out a new Terrasphere she doesn't want.
Rosemary, I don't want a Terrasphere. It's not right. I don't do new magic.
Sage does actually clarify the problem. She says the reason she doesn't want a Terrasphere is because her mom would be furious with her. She's gotten what she wants and what her parents approve of mixed up, which does make me wonder why on earth her parents sent her to the High Guardian Academy in the first place if this was going to be a problem. Wouldn't it make more sense to homeschool her in the ways of old magic and healing if they didn't want her to use new magic? That's like sending your Muslim daughter to a Catholic school and then getting upset that she has to buy a rosary. Why would Sage's parents send her to the academy if they didn't want her to use any new magic? Did they expect her to do all the academy studies but only use old magic regardless of what the school curriculum is? Are they so insular that they were unaware that the academy operates mostly on new magic despite Rosemary, Sage's best friend's mother, being a graduate of the academy and could have informed them of how the school operates? Is it actually not that big a deal to them and they meant for Sage to focus on being a healer first and foremost and it was just like a lack of communication? Is it a giant non-issue and Sage has been overthinking this so much she sent herself into a state of anxiety over it? I guess we'll have to find out in a later episode. We never find out in a later episode. They go into a Diagon Alley wand shop where they meet another side character who goes to the High Guardian Academy, Slime Boy. He's one of the more popular characters in the show, for presumably the same reason Vet Summer is a popular character.
That's what everyone calls me. I kind of like it. It's succinct. Slime, and then Boy.
In case you're wondering, Slime Boy isn't voiced by a professional voice actor either. He's voiced by Julian Coster, who I'm told is a famous musician. Also, the wiki lists him as an elf for some reason. Is the High Guardian Spice wiki run the same way the Invader Zim wiki is, in that all its facts are sourced from hopes and dreams? Anyway, Slime Boy opens the glass cabinet for Sage to pick a new Terrasphere and then decides to leave them unsupervised. Sage picks one and Slime Boy re-enters the scene. Why did he leave? Remember how in part 1 I said this show makes bizarre, meaningless decisions that eat up time and serve no purpose? Anyway, enough of that. We need to get back to Parsley, who is coping.
Are you alright?
I'm fine. Why?
Luckily, before anyone is in danger of emotional honesty, Time's mother comes into the forge to have some scissors sharpened. Parsley accidentally lets slip that the school is evacuated for the weekend and that Time is staying with her because her mother is out of town. You're probably not shocked to hear that Time and her mother have a tense relationship. Parsley's mother invites Time's mother, whose name is Flora, by the way, to dinner. This can only lead to good things and won't be awkward at all.
Misplaced my appetite. Gonna go find it.
Flora chases after Time, leaving Parsley alone with her family. This can only lead to good things and won't be awkward at all.
She shouldn't treat Time like a child.
She is a child, Parsley. You both are.
I never got to be a child, Mom. I've been looking after my brothers my whole life, and I love them. They've been my whole world. But I finally get this shot to make something of myself, and you want me to leave?
And here's where I drop an opinion I've been building up to. Parsley should have been the main character. And not because she's my favorite. If that were the case, Amaryllis would be the main character. But Parsley is more equipped as a character and writing device to be the primary focus of the show than Sage, and especially more so than Rose. Parsley is a young girl from a very large family who has had to put her own life aside both to help raise her siblings and also to take on the expectations of her parents regarding the family business. She gets a chance to claim her own identity by going to a prestigious academy to become a High Guardian. Despite of, or perhaps because of her upbringing of putting her own life aside for the sake of others, she's very quick to help people and forges friendships and easily endears herself to those around her. She seems the only one capable of warming up to the cold and closed off Time, who leads Parsley into becoming involved with the main plot, that being the mysterious rot that's affecting the tree near the school, who Time has an obvious history with. A history we as the audience don't know yet, but we're interested to learn more about. Information currently held close to her chest by Time, and so Parsley, who is naturally kind and likable, is the perfect window for the audience into what Time's troubles are. Because just as Parsley is easily liked by the fictional characters within the show, she is also easily liked by the audience. We see her be kind not only to named characters but also to small animals. We see her have her own passions and interests she works hard on. We see her be inventive and resourceful. We see how she reacts to when problems are put in her way and how she navigates that. We see she has a range of emotions like sadness and anger, so she's not merely the happy one. However, we also see her personal struggles, which are extremely relatable. She has ambitions and dreams, but they are in conflict with what her family want. And her family aren't horrible, abusive monsters, they are people she loves more than anyone, so it's not easy for her to just chase her dreams and forget about them. All of this is 100 times more interesting than Sage, whose biggest conflict so far has to do with the fantasy setting's magic system, which continues to be ill-defined and poorly explained, making her problems frustrating to try and understand. And although her worries about her parents' approval is relatable, it's poorly executed and results in making Sage look very ungrateful, as well as making her a downer to be around as an audience member. And as for Rose, I complained a lot previously on how Rose gets constant flashbacks to her mother being gone and her being sad about this, but while we were watching this, my friend nailed down what the problem is. Rose has to remind us about her mother so often because it's a substitute for having a personality. Think about it. What do we know about Rose as a character? She's energetic, optimistic, and likes to hit things with swords. She's also illustrated by the show itself as not being very bright. This doesn't have to be a writing problem or make her uninteresting, however. Just because a character isn't very smart doesn't mean their problems have to be shallow or uncomplicated. In theory, Rose's problems are complicated. Her mother, who meant the world to Rose, went missing, and Rose is trying to live up to her legacy as a guardian. However, nothing is ever done with this groundwork other than to remind us that Rose is sad about her mother being gone. And the reason I bring it up every time it happens is because the fact that Rose is sad about this is never developed any further. We don't learn more about Rose's feelings about her mother's disappearance other than she's sad. And never in the show is her desire to be a guardian explored. She wants to be a guardian because she likes hitting things with swords. That's it. She's not trying to become a guardian because she thinks it could help her connect with her mother, who has left a massive hole in her life she doesn't know how to fill. She's not becoming a guardian out of a sense of duty, even if it might go against her true identity. She's not becoming a guardian out of a sense of unfulfilled justice against those who took her mother. She's becoming a guardian because she likes hitting things with swords. Being sad about her mother, that has nothing to do with it. That doesn't have to do with anything, really. It's the only part of a character which isn't purely one-dimensional, and yet it also is never developed beyond that surface level sadness. So then I need to ask the question, why is Rosemary the main character? What about her personality or her story makes her being the central focus of all the events in the show warranted? And these are questions I would not ask if it weren't for the fact that the show is actively giving us other characters who not only do display personal stories that are more interesting to explore and get invested in, but who are also directly tied to the main plot, which Rose is not. And you might be saying, oh, but Rosemary is going to be Time's friend too eventually, but no, not really. The only reason Time becomes part of Rosemary's friend group is because Time is friends with Parsley, which is another reason Parsley is the best equipped to be the main character. She is the glue that holds all four main characters together. Sure, Sage and Rosemary are friends, but Time isn't friends with Rose or Sage outside of Parsley, nor does Sage or Rose care about Time. If anything, Time is often shown in a way where she could be more of a rival, or in some cases straight up antagonist towards Sage and Rose. Parsley is the eye of the friend group. She is easily likable, her problems are both complex as well as universally relatable, and her friendship with Time directly ties her to the main plot, as well as motivates her to help solve the problem based not only on the fact that it's something dangerous, but because her friendship with Time gives her a personal investment. Parsley being written as well as she is actively hurts Rosemary as the main character, as it puts a spotlight on how uninteresting Rose is, as well as how unlikable Sage is, which is a growing problem and will continue to be a problem as I move on to other episodes. Back to this episode, one of Parsley's brothers manages to climb up to the roof. Without a need to think about it, Parsley and Time fall into perfect harmony to rescue him, with Flora jumping in to help her daughter. Back with our main characters, Sage has finally been placated with the Terrasphere. She also finally opens up to her cousins as to why she's been acting strange.
Mom would be so angry. She despises new magic. She doesn't want me to use it.
Then why did she send you to this academy? Sage has a full-on meltdown about how everyone makes fun of her at school and how her mom would be furious with her using a Terrasphere, but also she feels weirdly drawn to this one and that they seem to have a bond of some kind. Her cousins tell her that if her mom gets upset about this, they'll take responsibility as bad influences. But also it would be very hypocritical because when Anise and Sage's moms were kids living in Witch Country, Sage's mom had a rebellious phase, as it were. Also, yes, there's a place called Witch Country where Sage's family is from, and it's literally just named Witch Country. Sage calms her farm and finally decides to accept the Terrasphere. Aloe conjures food from the ether again, and Rose opens up her cake locker to remind the audience that her mom is missing, and Rose is sad about it. That evening, Time has a tense goodbye with her mother. It seems whatever has driven them apart has not completely ruined their relationship, as Flora is willing to give Time space, and Time seems to second guess her desire to lash out. Parsley has some words with her mom in private. She seems resigned that her parents will insist she stay home, but her mother says that after seeing how brave she was in saving her brother, and that although they only realized how much they relied on her after she was gone, that it's not Parsley's job to raise the family on her own. She tells Parsley that both parents support her fully, and Parsley in turn offers to come visit on the weekends, which she's not busy with school, to help out a little.
But that's not your job. You've given us so much, and the least we can do is support you.
Mom?
Don't you cry, or I'll start crying, and we'll wake your sister up.
Am I feeling an emotion? Episode 5. The episode starts with Sage practicing with her new staff instead of her traditional broom. It goes about as well as expected. Luckily, Time is there to stop her from breaking an arm.
Just trying out my new Terrasphere, but I can't control it yet. You know how it is.
Not really. I don't mess with that shit.
God, see, that's what I'm talking about. Look at that. That is how language should be, Sega.
Time is hanging out by the corrupted tree, which we haven't seen since the end of episode 3, so we're probably going to get some progress on the main plot this episode. Oh, and I haven't mentioned it, but they've got 2 more cats in their dorm room now that apparently don't belong to any of them. They barely mention this and seem completely unconcerned, which, to be fair, if my dorm at school came with free cats, I wouldn't question it too much either. After the intro, we cut to a botany class. That reminds me of the class in Hogwarts, where their very first lesson was dealing with mandrakes whose screams could kill you if you hear them. There's a very small but nice second of footage where Time touches one of the trees and smiles to herself. I like it. Time not being very talkative forces the writers to communicate more about her through actions, rather than her just saying her motivations. Anyway, the crazy lady who turned everyone into animals in an earlier episode tries to murder a student to prove how dangerous these plants are, before she kills a live mouse by having the plants melted like she's a serial killer or something. I'm not so much upset at her killing a mouse because nature is cruel sometimes, but more that she's doing this for the sole purpose of traumatizing her students. And also that none of the students seem too upset about this. I went to high school with a girl who would burst into tears if the other students swatted a bee. I can't imagine a class of 14-year-olds being cool with the teacher killing a mouse in front of them.
Try not to lose an arm. Guardians mustn't worry about their limbs.
The class gets divided into groups, and Sage, Time, and Amaryllis end up at a table together. Not that Time cares too much, she's busy trying to progress the main plot by writing down her findings on the rot. Meanwhile, the PE teacher tells his class they have an essay due. I legit can't understand what the topic is because of how the voice actor mumbles the line.
5 pages on Gwenner's axe. Any questions?
He teams the students up, but since Amaryllis is in botany class, Snapdragon gets paired with Rosemary and Parsley, much to his annoyance. I wasn't a big fan of Snap's voice at first, but it didn't take too long for it to grow on me, to the point where eventually it's one of my favorite performances in the show. See, unlike Rosemary, Sage, and Parsley, and Time, who all sound as you'd expect animated main characters in the show to sound, Snapdragon's voice is very quiet, kind of nasally, brittle, and completely lacking in enthusiasm. In other words, it's one of the best performances for a 14-year-old I have ever heard.
Whatever.
I do think this is based more on the actor being cast to play herself essentially, and not exactly a display of good range. But for the purposes of this character in this show, it's perfect. Julia Kay is actually good at emoting too, but we'll get to that in a later episode. Anyway, moving on. We're back at botany class. Sage asks if she can use old magic to prune the plants instead, and the teacher asks, why? What exactly makes new magic new? I actually started writing down extremely basic questions here, like how long has new magic been in use to still be referred to as new magic and old magic instead of like modern magic and traditional magic? But it made my brain hurt, and we both know that there are no answers to these questions. They didn't bother with the world building. I don't know why I bother asking these things anymore.
With new magic, you can do anything!
So we have Sage arguing points which we, the 2020s audience, understand as probably being correct because we understand concepts like sustainable resources. And whereas this teacher, who should probably not be allowed near children, is arguing in favor of opulence and the ability to do anything without cost, Sage is arguing things like planting trees and thanks after drawing magic from the earth. And she says all of this as we pan over Time's notes. It makes you think that this argument of old and new magic they keep bringing up is gonna play into the main plot, which is also why Sage's character arc is so focused on that conflict. The teacher tells Sage that she can do what she wants, but says that history has proven that those who don't adapt are doomed to obsolescence. Which is kinda true to a point. Adaptation is not really necessary unless there is pressures to adapt. If there's no need to adapt, then, well, you don't need to adapt. Did you know leather burnishes have been found among Neanderthal remains and are identical to the modern bone versions we still use today? Sorry, you activated my hyperfixation by mentioning history. Sage struggles to prune her murder flowers using her old magic well after everyone else had already finished and left class. Amaryllis, annoyed to be sitting and waiting, says she'll just do it for her. Time, still engrossed with her book, distractedly mentions she doesn't want to miss lunch period. This upsets Sage.
You could help me, Time. I know you know how.
Didn't Amaryllis just offer to help? Also, wow, Sage. Ever hear of asking? Anyway, Amaryllis just does it for her, which annoys Sage, who didn't want to do it the easy way, and how old magic is sacred. Amaryllis asks her what part of making them miss lunch because one person in a group insisted on using a different methodology when everyone else had already completed their part of the assignment is sacred. Time, closing her book, agrees with the lunch part. Sage, unable to come up with a logical rebuttal, changes tactics to emotional manipulation and runs off crying. Quick tip: if you have a character argue against your main character's logic to a point where you as a writer have no counter-argument, it's not a good look to have your main character switch to saying how much the person they're arguing with is hurting their feelings. It just makes your main character look manipulative and wrong.
She was conducting human experiments, Mary.
I wouldn't do that.
Every sick person who walks through your front door is an experiment because you are not qualified.
Oh my god!
Oh my
goodness
gracious,
Jacob!
Means to you. You finally pay attention to me.
Go ahead, chastise him,
And
he's
then
right.
How many
take away
people
the
died
thing
because of
that means the
misdiagnoses and
most
bad
to me.
medication?
I liked you better when you acted like I didn't exist.
No, shut the fuck up, he's way better.
He is way better.
Got to you.
There is a bizarre moment here where Amaryllis tells Time that she was the one who made Sage cry by being blunt, and that Amaryllis respects that and even calls her brutal. For a reminder, this is what Time said that made Sage cry.
Sweating into plants instead of going to lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes?
So now not only is Sage being manipulative, but so is the narrative. Great. Meanwhile, the teacher is feeding live mice to the plant for no other reason than she seems to enjoy it and threatens to do it to one of the cats. Why is this here? Are we supposed to find it funny? The scene is structured like a joke, but where exactly is the part I'm supposed to find it funny? Haha, this teacher is casually killing small animals for her own amusement, lol. Back with the others, we learned their essay is about something called Gwyrner's axe. This is great for Rosemary, who likes weapons, and Parsley, who's a blacksmith. But Snapdragon is a bit out of his element, uninterested in the assignment and unhappy with being grouped with Rosemary and Parsley. He finally loses it when Rosemary can't stop talking about Sage. While they get into an arm wrestling match, Time shows up and awkwardly asks for help. It seems she's been looking for Sage to apologize for saying the word yeah, but can't find her. Sage hides in a random classroom to cry, but it's already being used as a designated cry space by Parnell. Parnell says that their cousin Cal has a tendency to be mean to them. The two of them decide to talk about their personal problems to each other, since Parnell says talking should help, although they're not really sure how. Sage complains about how she doesn't know how to use her new Terrasphere, and how everyone here only uses new magic and she's scared her mom will disown her if she finds out. Which is a very valid fear and would absolutely stress me out to the point of tears too. Parnell points out that they're terrible at geography, but they're still at the school.
Greg is very supportive. Whenever I study geography, Greg is there, also being bad at geography.
Sage decides to practice some more, this time with Parnell as support, since Parnell can't really do magic either. Which also makes me wonder if Sage is having such a bad time with the magic classes at the school, but Parnell doesn't do magic and is clearly not a warrior. Are there not more specialized fields here? Or is it literally you either kill stuff or do magic? Why am I bothering to ask when we know there are no answers?
Well, it was a thought.
Let's try other thoughts.
Slime Boy shows up, also wanting to use the designated cry classroom. He's not upset, he's just a bard and apparently has a crying song he wanted to practice. He says something to Sage about diagrams, but good luck trying to understand him.
I have to demonstrate it a lot at the store. Here, hold on. I'll draw you a diagram.
While you do that, Sage, can I talk? I think it's my turn.
Meanwhile, the rest of the gang are helping Time look for Sage. Well, Parsley is helping Time. Rosemary and Snapdragon are arguing about weapons, while Snap is writing the draft for the essay using Parsley's outline. Amaryllis shows up looking for Snapdragon and, happy to see Time again, joins the search party.
I'm bored, so I'm joining your failure brain.
Fine. Everyone can come. Just shut up. Everyone, shut up.
Back with the others. Good to see Sage make good on that whole it's Parnell's turn to talk about their problems thing. I guess it's only important when it's about Sage. She tries to do another spell and accidentally traps Parnell, Greg, and Slime Boy in a bubble. Good job.
This is like a dream I once had about hygiene.
I'm making so many best friends today.
Sage then spawns infinite Grogs in the bubble, the noise attracting the rest of the gang.
I thought you were Amaryllis' new puppet.
Ew! I didn't even say anything mean.
I have an idea. Why doesn't your best friend Amaryllis fix this?
Oh, I see. We don't have a rebuttal to that, so we're just gonna ignore that comment. Shut up, Sage. Parsley makes Time apologize for saying the word yeah, and this feeds Sage's ego enough for her to fix the problem she caused. Rose writes the conclusion to the essay, Time apologizes to Sage again, and I want to remind everyone this episode started with Time saving Sage from getting hurt, but apparently abstractly agreeing with someone Sage dislikes is a much bigger problem. Words are more important than actions. Got it.
It isn't the best.
We did it! Sharpest two on weapons theory. Shing, shing.
Oh, the essay was about weapon theory.
Drinking hot cocoa, sharing our secrets, happy 'cause I'm with you.
Originally, I didn't have any notes for this episode because so little happens in it, but this episode is a lot more frustrating upon a rewatch. And yet, I also completely understand why I didn't have anything to say about it originally, because this episode is the most filler any of the episodes have been so far. And every single episode out of the 5 we've had have felt like filler. The only reason I didn't skim this one as much as I could have is because I wanted to bring focus to how Sage's character is written. Not just in this episode, but consistently up until this point. The show is trying hard to write Sage's struggle with new magic as the central core to everything we've watched so far, but it could not have been a worse decision in my opinion. In episode 3 we were given the first glimpse of a main plot, but we have completely left that introduction of a story so that we can instead focus on Sage's struggle with the magic system, which we as the audience have had no proper explanation of. We get snippets of info here and there, but it all boils down to very basic lip service. New magic is easy, old magic is hard. We don't even really get any details as to why Sage is struggling outside of her not being immediately good at new magic, as she's unfamiliar with it. And because we the audience don't know anything about either magic system, we're basically left to sit back and just watch her without any way for us to relate or even really understand what the problem is. On top of this, Sage's behavior only makes her unlikable. We as the audience are already frustrated by being left out of the loop with the magic system, and restless because we know there's a main plot our characters aren't aware of. So seeing Sage be emotionally manipulative to those around her instead of getting on with the story makes the audience full out antagonistic towards her for wasting our time and not even being fun to watch. Meanwhile, Rose is a non-factor in the story so far. Not only does she have even less to do with the main plot than Sage does, but because she's written as a dense, fight-focused, Genki main character, she can't emotionally relate to Sage's struggles and has no deeper complexity to make her interesting on her own. And no, being sad because her mom is missing every now and then is not a complexity when it doesn't affect the way she thinks or behaves, other than when the script wants to remind us of it. She's a character completely divorced from anything in the story, be it the main plot or the other characters. This leaves her with absolutely nothing to do in this episode except actively ignore the essay her group is trying to write. This episode as a whole was extremely frustrating to try and recap. Apart from some time given to side characters like Parnell, Snapdragon, and Amaryllis, this episode is quite frankly worthless.
Basically, old magic is dumb.
Episode 6. We start the episode with Professor Carraway giving a lecture about divination using rooms in a typical, "Ooh, look at all this foreshadowing we're doing." But that's not really important because a new student is introduced. No, just kidding. This is actually Aster, and Rosemary immediately crushes on him. This is the most shocking thing in the entire series so far because I genuinely thought Rose and Sage were girlfriends. After the intro, we cut to PE, which is being held in, Americans call this a gymnasium, right? We just had RPE outside. Anyway, they have to do weapons practice using physical weapons. No terraspheres or magic allowed. But enough of that. We have high school teenage relationships to talk about. My favorite! When Rose draws her mother's sword, Aster comes over to ask if it's a replica. When Rose admits it's not and is actually the real flowering thorn and that Lavender is her mother, everyone is super impressed, especially Aster. This is another big shocking twist because I can't believe Rose, who never shuts up about her mom because it's her substitute for having a personality, hasn't told everyone around her that her mother is Lavender, her mother is missing, and that Rose is sad about it. I would say it's a writing contrivance so she could reveal that information here, but nothing. Are they giving Amaryllis an axe?
I feel alive!
Oh my god.
All I need is a miracle. All I need is you.
Whoever it was on the writing team that decided Amaryllis needed a double-headed axe as her weapon of choice, what is it like having a brain that large? This is actually an important moment, not really for Amaryllis getting an axe, although that is my primary focus, but because Snapdragon has his father's axe swapped with Amaryllis's rapier. This is the first mention and insight we get into Snapdragon's home life, and although it's not super subtle in terms of Snapdragon isn't the kind of person to wield an axe, it is subtle in that we hear the large axe Snap can't really use belongs to his father, which is the sole reason Snap feels like he has to use it, even though it does not work for him whatsoever.
I should stick with the axe.
Snapdragon, it can be painful to let go of the identity others expect you to manifest. But what of your legacy, young guardian?
This is actually really good character writing. It tells us so much about Snapdragon as a character, as well as giving insight into his backstory, motivations, and inner conflicts, without, say, a series of flashbacks after which our characters look sad and then their friends tell them why their backstory is sad. Anyway, back to the no-mans. Sage and I are on the same page for once, in that she's already tired of seeing Rose make eyes at Aster.
Seriously? What?
Parsley has no time for a drawn-out will they won't they thing and tells Rose to just go talk to him. And when Rose freaks out at this idea, Parsley just shoves her towards him so we can get this over with. Luckily for Rose, Aster seems really interested in her sword. Not enough to get her name right, but enough to talk to her, and I guess that's good enough for a 14-year-old girl, I guess. I don't know. This is not exactly something I can relate to be honest. We learn that apparently Rose's sword is enchanted, which means the metal itself can never break. Which makes that earlier episode where we had to sit through the broken hilt all the more infuriatingly pointless. Not that it matters though, this plot point is never used or mentioned again.
This will end well.
Displeased with her friend not spending every waking moment with her, Sage asks Parsley and Time if they think Aster is cute because she doesn't see the attraction. And boy, if you're not a fan of Sage being pissy about Rose spending time with someone who isn't her, this episode is gonna get under your skin really bad.
There is only one surefire way to get over a crush. Spend time with them.
Luckily, everyone else in this episode is written really well.
A guy tried talking to me during lunch once and an entire clam fell out of his mouth. That's when I knew. Nothing. Clams are bad. Don't look at me.
Snapdragon sees Sage's away from the constant presence of Rosemary and gathers up his courage to speak to her for once. After hearing Sage is annoyed at Rose for, talking to someone, Snapdragon asks if she'd like to spar with him.
It's just, the guy showed up like 5 minutes ago.
Touché.
Huh?
Please look at the acting on this character. I'm weeping. The PE teacher has everyone gather in a circle, which kinda backfires when Sage drags Rose to stand next to her and Amaryllis grabs Snapdragon when they get paired with the person opposite them in the circle for an obstacle course. Unsurprisingly for the narrative, Rose gets paired with Aster, Sage with Snapdragon, Parsley and Parnell and Amaryllis get to hang out with Time, who she actually really likes, much to Time's dismay. Anyway, obstacle course time.
Nothing. Just doing that old classic team activity of saying your teammate's name. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Rhubarb.
End my suffering. Sage is still complaining about Rose, although mostly because she's worried Rose is gonna fall flat on her face for not paying attention, which, okay, valid concern. Snapdragon is trying his best not to be too obvious with his infatuation with Sage and doing a horrible job of it.
Oh, hey, where's your hat?
I'm experimenting with not wearing it all the time.
It looks good, and it's nice to see your hair.
Stop.
Okay, see, this is the kind of flirty banter I am 100% behind. Luckily, this whole thing where Rose and Aster's interactions are some of the worst secondhand cringe ever, while Snapdragon and Sage are kind of genuinely cute, is intentional by the writers in this case. So although I'm complaining about it a lot, it is doing exactly what it's trying to. We're not supposed to enjoy seeing Rose and Aster together, but we are supposed to like Snapdragon, even though up until now, he's been acting as the mean girl's lackey. And so far, this episode on its own is really good at making him endearing. The obstacle course starts, and we get to see that despite looking like this, Aster kind of, sucks. Rose, on the other hand, doesn't, and despite Sage's concern, has to save Aster's ass, which keeps her from messing up. Parsley and Parnell go up against this put in the pendulum acrobat thing.
Parnell!
Jump, Parsley!
How did you know you'd bounce?
I didn't. But in general, I don't believe in oblivion.
Parnell? Are you okay, my dude? Amaryllis and Time are in the hedge maze, although they soon split up. Sage and Snapdragon are also in the hedge maze, but accidentally trigger the worst and most torturous trap any magical trial could possibly have. A slider puzzle. Sage is still complaining about Rosemary, and it's gotten to the point where even Snapdragon is getting tired of hearing about it.
You wouldn't get this. You're a guy.
I understand friendship.
Guy friendship is different. It isn't the same. Guys don't talk about their feelings.
Excuse me? Meanwhile, Rosemary is starting to pendulum at the, pendulum pit on being bored and infatuated. Aster continues to kind of suck. He also still doesn't get her name right. Parsley and Parnell go through the thorn maze, with actual literal corpses in it, which is kind of concerning. Are these Halloween decorations meant to scare the kids? Are these students who failed the class and the PE teacher just never bothered to rescue them? Is this like a Pirates of the Caribbean thing where they just used real skeletons as decoration? Who knows? Time and Amaryllis meet back up in the maze. Turns out the maze is magic, and trying to brute force your way through it kind of pisses it off.
This is for trapping me, you bastard!
Unfortunately, we have to cut back to Sage and Snapdragon, where Sage is, you guessed it, bitching about Rose and Aster.
But Rose could do so much better. I know what she needs, and it's not him.
Remember, Sage only had to endure Rose actually talking to Aster for like, what, 10 minutes tops? Anyway, Snapdragon has moved past annoyance and is just straight up done with Sage's bullshit.
Well, what if Amaryllis was going on and on about Aster all day?
I'd be happy for her. She usually just talks about murder.
Amaryllis continues to be the best character even when she's not on screen.
Rose and I are girls. You and Amaryllis are a different story. In any case, guys just don't understand that the bond between girls is just deeper.
Wow, Sage. Wow. Insisting and perpetuating the belief that men don't form emotional bonds as deeply as women do? There's a word for that. Now, what was it again? Oh, and if you think Snapdragon being reduced to tears as Sage coldly tells him that since he's a boy he doesn't understand emotional connections is bad, don't worry, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. But Doing our best to ignore this train wreck of an interaction, Sage solves the puzzle and we cut back to Rose and Esther. Rose is seriously getting tired of Esther's stupidity and belittling her because she's the girl and he's the hero, or something gender roles. It's like Utina, but stupid! Parnell figures out the weird wall climbing roller thing and they and Parsley finish the course first in class. Meanwhile, Time and Amaryllis are still trying to solve the maze, this time without hacking the hedges as much, despite Amaryllis' bloodlust. Time tries to learn a little bit more about Amaryllis as a human being, and not just a mean girl cliche. Amaryllis starts saying how her parents spent most of their time traveling and how she's been raised by 9 different au pairs. Time interrupts, not wanting to hear Amaryllis go into a big trauma dump on how she traded all her money to have more time with her parents when Time is still trying to figure out her own parental issues. But...
Are you kidding? I'd rather eat rocks than listen to my mother go on about her affair.
Wait, do you mean affairs like me?
Oh, she's a lush who never met a deckhand she didn't deck. With her hands.
Parsley and Parnell return to the PE teacher, who congratulates them on finishing first and wants to award Parsley the trophy for doing so. Parsley argues that they finished the course together, but the PE teacher says he's been tallying up scores since the beginning of class before the teams, which seems weird? Is this weird? This is weird, right? Parsley asks if he can just dock her some points or something so Parnell can win, but not unless she brutally assaults someone. That's not gonna happen.
It's okay, Parsley. My psyche is pretty pliable.
Back with Sage and Snapdragon, they spot Rose yelling at Esther in the distance and are both happy that it seems Rose has gotten over her crash. Snapdragon is finally free from Sage's bitching.
Snapdragon, I'm sorry. I was flipping out all day about Rosemary. For nothing. And I took it all out on you. Hey, if you ever want to talk about the heavier stuff...
Yes, please. I could really... There's some stuff I could really...
Fuck me. This is actually really cute. Also, I will begrudgingly give Sage some credit here that she doesn't just apologize for complaining about Rose all day, but also asserts that she knows Snapdragon cares about his friends. She doesn't apologize for being a raging sexist, but it's better than nothing, I guess. I can't expect her to have her warped opinion corrected just because she made one person cry. Anyway, since we've run out of drama, everyone escapes the hedge maze with no real fanfare whatsoever, and Rose reunites with Sage. Esther starts complimenting Rose to the rest of the class, telling everybody how good she is at the obstacle course. However, now that Rose isn't infatuated with him anymore, she tells him she's not really interested in hanging out. Now, I was with Esther complimenting Rose, but the second she makes noises that she's not interested, he immediately flips and calls her a stuck-up. Oh, he's one of those guys. Anyway, Parsley breaks his foot for calling Rose stuck up after complimenting her to the whole class. May I remind you, Sage got absolutely zero repercussions for stereotyping Snapdragon based on his sex and gender, but Esther calls Rose stuck up and Parsley physically assaults him. Gender equality. Anyway, the PE teacher laughs off his students physically assaulting each other, but more importantly, he doxes Parsley's points, which means...
Parnell, you are champion!
And let's all be honest, that's the real happy ending here. Guys, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I think I liked this episode. Don't get me wrong, Sage being horribly sexist and bitching about her best friend having independent thoughts and emotions is infuriating. But it's the kind of infuriating I've been expecting to see based on the show's reputation. But even when Sage is being horrible and annoying, she and Snapdragon are disgustingly cute together. Sage's scenes are made infinitely better by having Snapdragon be her partner. And this is completely Snap's best episode so far, giving him a ton of depth through very subtle means. allowing him to express his opinions and feelings, sometimes through words and other times through actions, and even helping give Sage some humanity. Parsley and Parnell, despite being sidelined for most of this, are really funny, and seeing Parsley asking to get points redacted so Parnell can win just because they clearly wanted more is another point to Parsley being just a genuinely nice person. Parnell is wonderfully weird. Time, although surly as always, gives some great blunt one-liners that often echo what the audience is feeling. And Amaryllis gets her own share of backstory and development while just being full of chaotic joy and destruction. Rosemary and Esther aren't the most fun to watch, but we barely focus on them really, and the interactions they do have on screen are at least supposed to be awkward and painful to sit through. This is also the first episode that had me genuinely cracking up at some of the shit the characters say. Look, the show is not exactly good, but at the halfway point of the entire show, it is at least as bad as people say it is, but also not as bad as people say it is. I do feel like we're forgetting something though. Oh well, probably nothing. Hopefully the episodes continue like this. Maybe it was just a rocky start, and most people gave up before the show managed to get its footing, and that's why it's got the reputation it does. But at least despite some stumbling, looks like it's on the right path now. I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
ゼルダの伝説出るついに出るゴージャス今度の冒険リアル君もすぐに体験憎いでやんすね昆虫ショー高画質の謎解きアクション戸惑うことなくのめり